Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third panel of our Future of Tradition. As you know, maybe some of you know, this event was an on-site event with people coming to the museum in spring, hence my lovely background. So as we are adapting to COVID, we gathered a panel of very skilled museum curators and collections managers, and they are ready to share their experiences with you. And we have Jessica Stevenson, collections manager at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum, Nikki Mckenzie, museum coordinator at Eldon House Museum, Tara Whitman, curator at Eldon House, and Melissa Cole, curator at Oshawa Museum. And now I know that in the background there is a video that will start soon. And after that we will reconvene and we will start answering questions.
Hi there, my name is Nikki Mckenzie and I'm the museum coordinator here at Eldon House. And this is Tara Whitman, our curator director. Eldon House is London's oldest standing residence. Built in 1834 by Captain John Harris, this house went through the Harris family for 125 years, passing through 4 generations from father to son. In 1959, the last generation of the Harris family decided to donate the house, many of the artifacts you see here, and Harris Park to the City of London. Eldon House is a great example of a Victorian household, and many of the artifacts in the home are evidence of the Harris family's travels worldwide. We have various pieces in the collection made of different materials and have over 15,000 artifacts.
If you're interested in getting into collections management as a job for your future, there are many different aspects of this. Really, care, preservation, and conservation are all encompassed in this job description. For example, a registrar might consider how to organize and catalog a collection using a database such as what we use called Past Perfect. A conservationist or a conservator would take care of individual artifacts in the preventive and conservation aspect of the care. And finally, a curator would really look at the different ways you could use a collection, how to create exhibits and programming, as well as permanent and non-permanent display. So it's quite varied and very exciting, and we're always so delighted to utilize our collection to be able to tell the many stories here at Eldon House. Now, Nikki, I have a question for you, which is, what is your favorite part of working in a museum?
Oh, that's a difficult question. What I really like about working in a small historical institution is the ability to do so many different things. For a historical institution such as Eldon House, I get to do a lot of great work with the collection, but I also get to talk to the public. And generally when the public comes into a smaller institution, they're really quite engaged with our artifacts. So that's pretty fun. Tara, same question for you. What's your favorite part about working in a museum like Eldon House?
I think we're on the same page. I think primary for me is research and working with the collection. There's something so satisfying in being able to get up close to these very old artifacts and unlock the story that they represent that might have been forgotten through time. So that's my number one, but you're right, we meet a lot of very interesting people, whether the public entering into our site, interested researchers, and also museum staff. I hope it's not overstepping to say that museum workers tend to be a very interesting bunch, a little eccentric at sometimes, so every day is pretty exciting.
Awesome. And what do you think the most challenging piece to conserve in the collection is?
Oh goodness, well you had mentioned that every material has a slightly different technique necessary in its preservation. So the way we treat, say, a damaged book and repair that is very different than how we polish our brasses. We have a fair number of ethnographical objects in our collection, so natural history. We have many trophies and horns and a fair amount of ivory. And I think if I had to choose one material that's most difficult to maintain at the right environmental capacity, that would be our ivories.
Awesome. Well, if you're interested in learning more about Eldon House, please visit our website at eldonhouse.ca or follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Stevenson, and I'm the Collections Registrar at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum at Wolseley Barracks in London, Ontario. I was always interested in museums, and I knew from the get-go when I wanted to go into university that museums was where I wanted to end up. And I always wanted to work with collections specifically because I always wanted to be the person in the museum with the special access to get to touch the objects. That was my goal. So I ended up getting my Bachelor of Art in History at Carleton University. And then every summer I was lucky enough to get a job, usually in some form of cultural institution. So I was able to get a student job at a museum, I worked in a library with an archival collection, and then I worked in an actual archives with a photographic collection, and then I worked in another museum doing inventory for their collections work. And then I applied to the Master of Museum Studies program at University of Toronto. I actually ended up doing the combined degree program with the Museum Studies and the Master of Information. So I did 3 years, and I concentrated in Archives and Records Management with the Master of Information, and now I work here. I think the main thing about working with collections is you really have to have a passion for it. There's a lot of museum collections out there that have really cool stuff, and there's a lot of things in the collection that maybe aren't so cool, but you kind of have to be equally passionate about all of it. But one thing that I didn't really understand fully until I was actually working in museums is how involved the collections process can be. You're not just holding on to an object for a little while or until you're done with it. You want to be able to preserve that object for as far into the future as you can, while also being able to use that object for different purposes. So are you going to use it in an exhibit, or are you going to use it as an example? Do you want to have it available online? And there are different kind of considerations for how to preserve an object so that you can use it for these things. Right now at the RCR Museum, we are currently packing artifacts into boxes. We're moving most of the collection from a different storage area to this new rolling shelving, and we're going to be inventorying all of the artifacts and grouping them together in boxes, and then we'll be able to actually have the collection neatly on these shelves.
Hi, my name is Melissa Cole, and I'm the curator at the Oshawa Museum. I have been fortunate to spend the last 20 years of my career here at the Oshawa Museum, which is also located within my hometown. And that also makes it another reason why it is so special to me to have been able to spend a good portion of my career here so far. I did start here at the museum in 2000 as an intern after graduating from Thumlin College's program, Museum Management and Curatorship. I also have a degree from Trent University in anthropology. And I always wondered what I was going to do with that anthropology degree and where it was going to take me. And that's when I discovered that Fleming College had this amazing museum studies program. My job is definitely incredibly varied. For instance, this morning after checking email, I spent the morning looking through newspapers from the 1890s, seeking out an ad that was related to a breadbasket that I had on display in the exhibit that I'm actually currently standing in. My afternoon will be spent installing graphic panels for that same exhibit. Tomorrow I actually have an appointment with a member from our museum community. Rather than have her come down, especially during COVID, rather than her come down to the museum, I've made an appointment with her to come visit her at her home. And of course I will be wearing a mask when I go to visit her, but to see about this beautiful wedding dress. She has already sent along some photographs, but I still would like to view it in person before we accept it into the collection. It's a wedding dress from the 1930s. She has an image of the dress, she has of the woman wearing it, as well as the church that they were married in. The gentleman that was the groom was also a principal at a local school, so there's just so much rich history attached to this one item that will hopefully be coming and making its way into our collection. And lastly, I got to show off and brag about the students that I have working with me right now. It's another aspect of my job, is being able to engage with students and give back to them what I have learned through my years in my career. And for instance, this beautiful sign wall behind me was designed by our students, Mia and Dylan, and it was also installed by them as well. Dylan is actually a graduate of Fleming College's Museum Management Curatorship, so he's actually doing his internship with us this fall.
In my role as curator at a small institution, I spend a lot of time managing, researching, exhibiting, and talking about the museum's collection. A lot of this material is now shared online through podcasts, blogs, articles, and on-site through exhibitions. One of the best things about working at the Oshawa Museum is working with the collection, and I'm always inspired by the challenge of developing new and unique ways of telling stories using these collections and exhibitions. When developing an exhibit, it's important, especially at a community museum, that we include our community's voice within these exhibits by reaching out to people and our community in innovative ways. I like to call these exhibits community curated. For example, when our community celebrated 90 years as a city, we reached out to our community for memories and artifacts reflecting on their lives in Oshawa, which resulted in an exhibition called Reflections of Oshawa, celebrating 90 years as a city. Besides the education requirements to work in museums, to get a job as a curator, you need to be interested in objects, research, and interested in history and inquiring about what objects can tell us about the past and present. And you should be able to work in a variety of areas and enjoy practical work, because a lot of curatorial jobs are quite practical. You'll enjoy a balance of research, writing, and in more practical tasks such as exhibition work. It really is a fantastic job. I guess I'd have to say that after spending 20 years of my career in it. Because it is so varied, and you get to meet so many different kinds of people. If you're interested in curatorial or exhibition work, you definitely need to be open-minded, as you can about things that might help you along the way. Whether it's trying different internships, volunteering at museums, or stepping outside a job that might be outside of your comfort zone. Remember, you might not get into a curatorial role right away, and it may take a few different jobs to get there, but once you're there, it's worth the effort.
So we have finished the video, and in the order I am seeing our panelists on the on my screen, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves so that you know who is talking. So the first one on my screen is Tara Whitman. Tara, your microphone is okay, there we are.
I just did that just to remind everyone to turn on their microphone. So that was totally on purpose. I'm just kidding. So my name is Tara Whitman. I am curator director at Eldon House, which is a historic house museum downtown London. I have been here since 2004, and I've worked in museums for coming on 25 years. So very happy to be a part of this panel and be able to answer any questions that you might have today.
Next one on my screen is Nikki.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Mckenzie. I am the museum coordinator here at Eldon House. I've been working in museums for about 5 years. I actually started off at Eldon House as the intern. And since then, I've kind of made my rounds through various London museums, including the RCR. And now I'm here at Eldon House in a full-time position.
Next on my screen is Melissa Cole.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Melissa, and I'm the curator at the Oshawa Museum. I've been in this role since 2002. My prior role was in the programming position at the Oshawa Museum as well. I came into this site as an intern, and I have never left. I've been very fortunate to remain at the same place that I started, and it's also my hometown. So I'm pretty excited to have been able to be in this position for this long. So it's been about 20 years since I've been at the site, since 2000.
Excellent, thank you. And the last one on my screen is Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Stevenson, and I'm the Collections Registrar at the Royal Canadian Regiment Museum. I'm what's known as an emerging museum professional. I just graduated in June, and then I was at the RCR Museum as a student this past summer, and then I just started this role in September.
Thank you. So we are here in the collections panel, and we have already collected several questions from our participants. I am going to start with the first question and ask our panelists to answer or give an input. Again, the same sequence. I will go with whom I see first on the screen. And the first question is, what fields of study are required to become a collections registrar, I suppose? So, Tara.
I promise that will be definitely the last time. So areas of study that are required, I think we'll have a different mix of answers to that question, because a number of us come by different means. I can speak to my areas of study, which was in my undergrad. My work in undergrad was a joint major between cultural studies, which is definitely applicable to the work I do now, and philosophy. And I think, similar to Michelle, I didn't know where I would be using that philosophy in my future, but it's something that's come in very, very handy. And then in my graduate work, I studied art history, and for 12 years was an art history lecturer both at Fanshawe College and at Western, while also working in museums. And so it was really my practical experience working in museums that eventually led me into the position of curator. So that was my journey and how I got here.
So the next one is Nikki.
So like Tara said, various kind of degrees sort of help you get into museum collection. I myself am a graduate of Western University. So I did an undergraduate degree in history and classical studies, so ancient Roman and Greek, and had some practical experience working in archaeology before I went on to a master's program in public history, which sort of gave me a look at various points of museums and heritage in general. One of the classes that was really useful to me was something called museology, in which we learned about designing exhibits and then actually putting exhibits together. So a little bit of experience working with various museums to design a kind of cohesive exhibit at the university. And since then, I've been working at trying to get some more practical experience. So I've worked with various museums in their collection, and also taking courses through the Ontario Museums Association is something that is frequently recommended to museum professionals to help get them more experience in the field.
Melissa.
I took my study, I took an anthropology degree at Trent University. And while attending Trent in our first year anthropology class, a professor by the name of Dr. Julia Harrison introduced us to a program that was a joint program between Trent and Fleming College, the Museum Management Curatorship. So I did that program jointly and graduated in '99 from that program. And I have to tell a small story about how it's not exactly what you saw, how I got to my position, but prior to entering that program, I always like to share that I actually cut out the job description from our local paper while I was at home for the summer for the curator position before I entered the museum studies program. And I actually still have that cut out. This is back in the day when they used to advertise for jobs in the local paper, and the curator position was in there before. And I always thought one day I hope to be there. And I never actually really thought I'd get there, but I have. So it's kind of neat. It's kind of like an early version of a vision wall. And I always keep up in the field as well through other, through conferences and such.
Yeah. Professional development opportunities, they are very useful. And communicating with our peers and our colleagues. And the last one is Jessica. So if you want to answer what fields of study are required for becoming a collections registrar? You are the freshest out of the school bench, so you have a very fresh perspective.
Yeah, well, I always knew that museums was the goal of where I wanted to end up, and I wasn't entirely sure leaving high school how to get there necessarily. So I kind of stalled a little bit, and I figured that a BA in history would be a good place to start. And so I went to Carleton for that because at the time, my very lofty goal was to one day work at the Canadian War Museum. So I figured if I start in Ottawa, maybe I can, get in there somehow. And it was good because there are many staff that work at that museum who have affiliations with the history department at Carleton. So I was able to do a practicum at the War Museum in my last semester. And then I kind of picked the Master of Museum Studies program at University of Toronto after kind of assessing where I wanted to go in museums. And collections has always held my interest, but I also wasn't sure if I was going to ever be aim for a curator or even a director or, and I knew that I would have to work these steps to get there, but I didn't want to box myself in necessarily. And I figured that the Master of Museum Studies would give me the broadest overview of both kind of a theoretical background understanding of museums with the practical application of it. And there was a few courses in the Master of Museum Studies that very specifically focused on collections that kind of reinforced my interest in it. And I knew that hopefully I would be able to break out and get some sort of starter role in a museum somewhere that would be at least working with the collections. And thankfully I've been lucky enough to end up here.
Thank you. So before we move on to the next question, I would like to mention that many can find their way in a museum by simply going to volunteer in a museum. If you are in an undergrad program right now or in high school and you don't really know how you want to go about and exactly what to do with how to become a curator or things like that, just feel free to go contact the museum of your interest and see if there are opportunities for you to volunteer, so you know the field better. And now let's move on to question number 2, which is a very complex question because it has technically 3 parts. What is the most unique item or collection you have ever worked with? And it can be a set, an item, a whole collection. That is up to you what you choose. So let's go reverse, and I'm going to start with Jessica.
Okay, I think the most unique item that I have ever dealt with was I was a summer student at the Lambton Heritage Museum and working with some of their textile clothing items. They had this bomber jacket and it was kind of like a silk and it had polymerettes on the breast, and it was a jacket that was worn by one of the members of, I don't know if anyone knows, but Sarnia has like petrochemical plants. They've got Chemical Valley. And one of the companies there was the Canadian Polymer Corps. And they had a Chemical Valley Hockey League in like the 40s through to like the 70s. And this jacket was worn by one of the members of the women's team. So all of the women in the office had a women's team and they were the polymerettes. And so we had this jacket, and I just thought it was the most fascinating item because I really feel like you don't necessarily associate the stereotypes of sports and women, and the fact that it was the 50s. So not only there was enough women in this office that they got together to have a team, but it was, I mean, imagining women playing hockey in the 50s, I feel like isn't really as well known sport history wise. So I really love this jacket, and I saw it in the collection and I was obsessed with it. And one of I wouldn't say it's my favorite item ever, but it's one of my favorites that I've ever worked with.
Thank you. So Melissa, do you have a favorite item?
I have a favorite collection, but I think I'm going to talk about probably one of our more unique collections. Is a collection of coffin jewelry that came to us, that was acquired from an actual cemetery that had to be moved. Some burials had occurred outside of within a road allowance. So basically they're buried outside the boundaries of the cemetery. So an archaeological firm, this took place, I believe it was back in the 90s. So prior to me being at the museum, this archaeological firm had to ethically reinter and relocate the bodies back into the burial grounds. And now there's a highway that would have otherwise there would have been a highway going over top of them. So it's also great that they acknowledge that the cemetery was there, because I know some have been bulldozed in the past. So I like to highlight that aspect as well. And that they did work with an archaeological firm. And so we actually received a collection of coffin jewelry just from pieces that they weren't sure where, they just kind of got mixed up. So they brought them out for education purposes, to learn about burial customs in the 19th century. So it's a really unique collection. I know when I have volunteers working with the collection, they may find it a little odd that we have such a collection like this, but it's actually quite exquisite. The pieces are quite beautiful. We've even had some pieces restored working with the Fleming Conservation Program. So it's a really unique collection in that aspect.
Nikki.
Yes. So one of the most unique collections I think I've ever worked with, and certainly one that caused the most conversation at home, was the animal horns here at Eldon House. For those people who've been, the hallways of Eldon House are lined with animal horns that were collected by Ronald Harris, one of the owners of the house, when he went to Africa for a period of about 5 years. And it's definitely interesting to take them down from the wall, look at them up close, and to clean them. It's not something I'd ever thought I'd get my hands on. Was like a collection of like antelope horns, but they were pretty cool to work with. And it certainly caused a lot of discussion amongst my family and friends, who thought it was kind of a strange thing for me to say that I was working on that day.
And Tara.
I think I'm close to the same page as Nikki. We do have a whole natural history collection here at Eldon House, and in some ways the collection is very unique. Most of it was collected around 1900, and the taxidermy objects in particular are a challenge in terms of the collection care, because many of them had different techniques of how taxidermy would be done today. So for example, we have a almost 6 foot long tarpon, a fish that's been stuffed, that is on display. And the technique at that time in how you would taxidermy a fish is not the way you do it today, which would be to keep the gills and the fins and so on, and then kind of create almost styrofoam armature. They actually dried out the fish with a kind of desiccant, a fancy salt, and they kept the whole of the skin, and then they lay the skin over what kind of amounted to wood shavings. And so these sorts of things are very hard to keep together. And so this fish, every now and again, we give a good treatment to, and now and again it springs a leak of that wood shaving coming out. We also have a couple stuffed frogs, which are in poor state of disrepair. And because of the nature of the taxidermy collection, we kind of see that they've gone through periods of neglect, in that, you know, you could approach these things as slightly slightly abject. So when I first discovered our stuffed frogs, they were in the drawer of a dresser as opposed to in a collection area. So I'm opening this drawer of the dresser and there's all these stuffed frogs, and some of them don't have their bits and pieces. So, you know, to go back and make sure that these are in good shape, and also just value how they were used historically, whereas, you know, our approach these days is not to probably hang the stuffed frog on the wall, but that overall natural history collection, I think, is the most exciting for us, in that it is just so unique. And it was beloved by the family. We have historical photos of these things hanging on the walls of Eldon House at various eras. And so the family valued it. And so as such, it's an important part of our own story.
The second and third part of the question, because it's very interesting. Was this unique item collection your favorite or least favorite? And do you ever go back to it? I think we can answer with an yes or no, but please elaborate if you feel necessary. So let's start with Tara.
Definitely for me, one of the most favorite collections that I work with is our natural history collection. So absolutely yes. And do I go back and look at it? I'm still on site, so it's something that I come into contact with quite frequently, but definitely yes, enjoy working with it.
And Nikki.
The horns are definitely one of my favorite parts of the collection, and I encounter them daily because they are all over the walls, which is kind of fun.
Okay. And Melissa.
Oh, it's a unique collection that we have, and I definitely do use it in exhibits, and I've even published a paper on it with my co-wrote a paper on it, on this collection with my executive director, Laura Suchin. So definitely a unique collection that we both enjoy.
And Jessica.
Definitely one of my favorite objects. Because I'm no longer at that museum, I can't really go back and look at it. I did write like a little social media post for the museum during my time as a student. So if that's still online somewhere, then maybe, but.
Mm-hmm. We received a question recently, but I will leave it for the end. Now we go to question number 3. What do you do if you don't know what an item is? That's very fun. So let's start with Melissa because her phone is unmuted.
I'm sure it's going to be similar. We have a lovely listserv that I believe many of us utilize quite often when we get a unique object that we don't have any idea. I believe most of us probably also belong to regional networks that we utilize as well. It's our colleagues in the field. I do have a couple of archaeologists, I always say in my back pocket, 2 colleagues that I can contact as well, who are also very knowledgeable. But definitely my first go-to is colleagues in the field.
Yes, clearly. Tara.
I second what Melissa is saying. I belong also to that listserv, and there's wonderful things that come up almost daily on it, where curators or folks in our field have taken a picture of something that they've stumbled upon in their collection, which happens more often than you might imagine, and say, does anybody know what this is? And that's a wonderful part of our job. And also, I mean, to ask ourselves, what was this used for? What does it look like? What are the materials that it's made out of, is something that even in our own education programs, when we're trying to encourage students to think in the manner of a curator, is a part of the exercise. So, but definitely asking others for assistance, and even once you get a glimmer of what kind of capacity this thing might represent, then you start the research process, and that can take you quite a long way.
Nikki.
So my first step, if I don't know what something is I ask Tara, which is kind of funny. So I generally try and ask colleagues first, and if we can't figure out what something is, we try and use listserv, or we do a lot of research. And sometimes even a Google search is like kind of useful to sort of figure out what things are. I found with some of our collection that places like eBay yield a lot more information than I would have previously thought, which is kind of neat.
Absolutely. And Jessica.
Yeah, basically echoing what everyone else has said. It's kind of like, if I don't know what something is, I ask my coworkers, I ask the internet, I ask other museum colleagues, and then, I mean, sometimes it's kind of fun if you're really stumped, nobody seems to know what this thing is. Sometimes it's fun social media post for the public too, to just kind of put it out there, like, we have exhausted all resources. Does anyone recognize this thing? And then, you know, if at the end of the day you still don't, you just have to describe it to the best of your ability and its record.
Yeah, and I could add to everything that was said. We also ask the volunteers. In our case, it's a military museum, and there would be the odd end of military equipment. And you never know the fountain of knowledge that comes out of these people. So asking volunteers or people who may be knowledgeable of a field or another is another good option. So we are going to question number 4, which is a little bit repetitive, but we can reiterate. How did you get into this field, and did you always know you'd end up in this position? So who wants to go first? Unmute your phone. Okay, Nikki.
I'll go first. So to answer, no, I didn't always know that I wanted to be in museums. There was a time where I wanted to be a lot of other things. And when I got into museums, I didn't know that I would get into this position. I actually tried on a few other positions, including being a programmer, which was working a lot with kids. I've been an interpreter, so I've been front facing with the public. But the position I'm in now, I like where I've ended up because it allows me to do all of those things and work with the collection. So, I mean, when you get into this field, you don't always know what you'll like. Maybe you start off thinking you love working with collections and then realize that you don't. Or you have a great tolerance for kids in your daily life, but maybe it's not your gig in your workspace, and that's fine.
Who wants to go next? Unmute your phone, your microphone.
I can go next.
Lisa.
Oh yeah, so I already talked a little bit about cutting out that ad, but again, I didn't ever necessarily believe I would get to that position of curator. I did a lot of volunteering as well, which I didn't mention prior to even getting into the Museum Studies program. Within Peterborough, where I was going to school, I volunteered at the Canadian Canoe Museum and Hutchinson House, and just being involved with the Peterborough Museum as well. So getting a glimpse at how different sites work as well. Each museum is unique. But finally I got to be honest, I stepped outside of my comfort zone when I went into the programming position at the Oshawa Museum, and I probably wouldn't be where I was today if I didn't step into that role. And I debated about it. I wasn't one for being front of house or wanting to do tours, which is what a lot of the position involved at the time, and working with school groups. That wasn't necessarily, I really wanted collections. But I stepped outside of that my comfort zone. I ended up loving the position, and I still actually help with programs today if need be. If we're short staffed, someone's sick, I'll step into the role as well. So yes, I gotta admit, stepping outside of your comfort zone to kind of sometimes get to where you want to be, it helps.
That's how it goes. And Jessica.
Yeah, well, like I was saying in my little video clip, I kind of always wanted to do history. And my favorite thing about history was museums. I was one of those kids who was always super excited to go to the museum. My family would get mad on vacations because I would want to go to every museum in the new city, and they would be like, no, you can pick 2. That's it. And I think part of it too was the objects for me. My real goal kind of going into university was, like I said, I wanted to work at the Canadian War Museum, and I wanted to be a curator. And then as I kind of went through school, learned more about history and historical research, even my Master of Museum Studies, I kind of really fell in love with collections. I realized that it wasn't necessarily the stories so much as the objects themselves. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm still just starting out in my career, and I am not ruling anything out at all, but collections is kind of where I wanted to be, and that's where I'm happy to be for now.
That is very relevant indeed. And in continuation of this question, I just received one on the chat feed. And by the way, if you have questions for the chat feed, please address them to Grace. She's our question dispatcher. So the question that I received is, I've just completed my MA in collections management and I'm having difficulty finding a job. Is pursuing a PhD worthwhile? So should I answer? I feel like I should answer because I have a PhD. So I'm not exactly sure which program offers MA in collections management in Canada, but my career path goes back in Europe 25, 30 years ago. And I did do an undergrad in museum studies and art history, then a master's degree in international relations and cultural management, and then a PhD in Canada. Now, what I can say is probably I would not have found a job as a curator if I wasn't enrolled in a PhD program, but my case is rather atypical. So I don't know if a PhD guarantees a job in a museum. So anyone else who would like to answer?
I'll just add a little bit, Georgiana, and I think you're right. I mean, in some ways, our education doesn't always match with the roles that we gain, and I mean, a lot of it is really kind of site specific. So, you know, depending on where you're working or what has an opening, we know that our field is not one that has too many jobs. I think the approach that I've taken, or even in you know mentoring our internships and other staff members, is that if you really want to work in museums and you're interested in museums, taking the opportunities as they come is so important. And we speak about kind of the curatorial role. The curatorial role for me means that I cut the grass regularly. You know, I'm fixing things with the tools that we have in the basement. So there's no one kind of, you know, firm job description in at least the field that I've experienced in my career. So again, you know, being open to the opportunities that come, and certainly, you know, pursuing a PhD for education's sake is commendable. But I think, you know, in the field in general, we're all lifelong learners. I'm learning something new every day, and I think that's true for a lot of our colleagues.
Yes, yeah, that's how it goes. Melissa?
Again, to just reiterate, I think it depends. It's very site specific. In my role as curator at my site, a PhD is not required. If you're going to be working, not to use a ROM all the time, but to use a large institution such as that, their curators do have PhD. There's specific degree programs with usually specific specialized collections.
Yes.
So it depends on the site. A lot of historic house museums, such as what I work, or a small site like ours, a PhD is not necessarily required. I'm not going to say it's not going to help though. Like it's a PhD, you're always going to have an advantage having one. So it's not to say no, don't go for it. But every site's unique.
Yeah, will it grant finding a job? That's like any other degree. Nikki, do you want to add something?
I think I would just say that it doesn't necessarily give you a leg up in everything. I mean, if you're looking at larger institutions for sure. But I would just say keep trying if you're looking for a position, and definitely take those opportunities as they come. I, for example, worked as an interpreter at a pioneer village, and the curator found out I had collections experience, and then I ended up working a lot with the collection as opposed to doing interpretation. So sometimes even just looking a little bit outside of what your field is very helpful.
Yeah. Jessica?
Yeah, I would just say everything that has already been said, basically. I think, yeah, a PhD is super commendable if that's what you want to do, but don't do it with the expectation of the leg up. Do it because you want the PhD. Like, yeah.
I have 4 more questions in 15 minutes. So we are going to speed up a little bit here. And the next one is, what skills do you find most valuable in your own work and in the work of others in your workplace? Tara.
I know since time is of the essence, I'll answer very quickly. Flexibility every time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ability to multitask.
Okay, perfect.
Teamwork. You're going to end up needing someone's help at some point, so building those relationships is really important.
Yes. Jessica.
Consistency and attention to detail.
Yes.
That is correct, and I subscribe to everything that was said. The next question is, how difficult has it been to continue a career in heritage whilst being in a global pandemic? That's a very tricky question. So, Melissa, you want to begin? You are unmuted, and so I suspect.
I think that kind of goes off of our the last question.
Yeah.
Flexibility, adaptability. I believe across the board, I can speak on most museums across the province, those of us that are been able to have staff that not necessarily keep our doors open, but are open virtually. Being able to adapt. I'm not going to say it's, I hate to use the word difficult. I think it's challenging. It's given us all a chance to challenge ourselves. I think today, even being on this virtual talk, it's for some of us, we had to adapt to being comfortable to do that. I know I'm still working on that myself. It's a new way to do things. And I think we're all learning a lot. I'll speak on behalf of my network as well within York and Durham. You're seeing museums doing things outside the box, drive-through tours, Facebook Lives. How many of us did Facebook Lives before COVID?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I have to speak about, there are sites that may not open again as well. So there's that reality as well. There's so many of us that are fortunate, and we've been able to adapt really well. And I think that's because of the staff that we have and our volunteers as well. So I commend everybody in the field for what's been happening.
Indeed. Nikki.
Tara and I were actually talking about this earlier, which is like this pandemic has given us an opportunity to really be creative and to kind of, again, think outside the box, think about how we can better reach our public and think about the direction that we want our museum to go in the future. And that's been kind of a blessing in disguise in a weird way, is that we've been able to accomplish a lot and think critically about where we're going. But like Melissa said, you know, that challenge comes with kind of looking at our network and going, maybe this museum won't open its doors again, or we have to figure out a way in our museum network to kind of work better with each other so that we can all kind of make it through this pandemic, which is very interesting.
I have a bit to contribute to this. I wouldn't say that it was difficult. I would just say that it wasn't easy to navigate the pandemic, and it's not over. And those present here, the panelists present here, are the lucky ones who were not majorly affected by the pandemic, in that we lost 50% of staff and the budget and so on and so forth. So this is a very important factor. And I know there were at one point community museums, professionals in community museums, they were redirected to do other jobs. They were given the option of doing something completely different, most likely in long-term care facilities, as opposed to stay at the museum, which was closed. So we are the lucky ones, and so far we fared well. We will see what the future brings, but we hope that future is not very far away. So let's move on to the next two questions, and those would be the last questions, and they are both related to collections management. One of them came from a collector in oh, I have actually 4 more questions. I am sorry. So a collector in Ottawa is trying to improve his understanding of collection management techniques. And while he finds the advice about volunteering very practical, he was wondering if we have any suggestions as to a program that would offer such a special, well, these skills. So Melissa, can you answer this question?
Are they looking for a program, like a computer program?
I think it's more a course in collections management. To be honest, I'm thinking of the OMA.
Oh yes, there's lots of course, and I would actually recommend the OMA because it's one that you can do part-time. You don't have to quit it, you can do it all at your own pace.
Yeah, we should say that OMA is Ontario Museums Association.
Yes, and you can actually, like right now, you can give that, put into your search engine and look it up. You can see all the different programs that are offered, and collections management is one of them. And of course, there's other colleges. U of T has a master's program, but if you're looking for specific just collections management, I would start with the Ontario Museum Association. It's a, I actually know one of the individuals that has instructed the course before, and you can learn a lot through that. And it's affordable as well, actually, in terms of programs that are out there. You will have to pay a small fee.
Anyone has a different suggestion? Yeah, so that's the starting point. And Grace has shared that link in the chat room. All right, so then I have one more question. So here we are. I am interested in learning which types of software are recommended as most useful for collection management. So from your experience, can you share some software names that are useful? Nikki.
A lot of museums in Canada and the United States use a program called Past Perfect, which is pretty interesting. It's pretty easy to use once you sort of get the hang of it. You can even get some of the books for Past Perfect online and some of the software online if you want to get a head start. There are YouTube videos that can help teach you as well. And it's, like I said, it's pretty common in North America to use Past Perfect.
And they have a very good customer service.
They do.
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
Melissa, did you have something to contribute?
We actually also use Past Perfect. Another program we've used that I know other sites use is in Magic as well. And I know it's friendly as well.
Yeah, there are a large variety of softwares available. I think it depends on the profile of the collection, more or less. I mean, some museums would prefer one, others would prefer another one. Tara, you had something to add.
I was just going to quickly add, it was about 5 years ago that we changed our database program. Prior to adopting Past Perfect, we were running on, the equivalent of an Excel sheet.
Yeah.
That wasn't unusual and very popular in the 1980s and 1990s. And when we realized that we wanted to have a different platform that would allow us to integrate images and more detail, we did a pretty thorough survey of what was available at the time within our budget. There are many different programs out there. A lot of them are American based, and it would really depend on the size and the budget of your site, because we liked the look of some things that were well out of our price range and that didn't have as much support than Past Perfect, which is what we eventually went on to. But I think most important, if you're being held up by the decision of what platform to use, what type of database, is you just keep that collection work going. Keep making your records and your paperwork, and everything will be able to move eventually. But for us, that was a long process in reference. So yeah, you keep working, and you'll find the right thing.
So before I go to the very last question, there is a student who's wondering if we have a link to the listserv, meaning the OMA listserv. I think it's a membership listserv. Am I correct?
Yeah.
So you have to be an OMA member and sign up to the listserv, and then you start receiving the emails. But Melissa, do you want to add something to that?
Nope, that's exactly it. You have to be a member, I believe, in order to be a part of that listserv.
All right. For the last 4 minutes of our allotted time, I have the coolest question ever. Does your collection have orphan objects that you can't document and lost objects that you can document but not find? And how do you handle them? This is the coolest question. Okay, who wants to jump in first? Melissa?
Yeah, we definitely, I'm sure we all do, we're all laughing. And I hate to laugh about it, but we all have to deal with it. My favorite when doing inventories is found in the collection. That's how so there's no background information, but believe it or not, I'm fortunate we have the archives on site as well for our area. So the minutes from our meetings, like past membership meetings, they actually can sometimes help navigate this. And then there's objects that are missing in the collection. We can't find them. Again, kind of looking to those documents. I have to be honest, early on in the 70s, I'm sure this happens across the field. The odd board member, when it was volunteer run, sometimes objects would possibly be stored elsewhere. And I'm not sure if they're missing through that. I would like to think it's not through theft, but I believe it's possible. I have to be honest, we don't get a lot of that at our site, but it's not unusual to see that. But looking at past minutes and stuff can sometimes help us navigate and find answers to those missing objects or found in the collection. Those are my stories.
Sarah.
The answer to the two questions is absolutely yes. I think we all find things in our collections, and it's just so, it's on one side bewildering. Our site has been a museum since 1960, so it's bewildering that we could find something that had no record attached to it. But also it's one of those like high points in our day, right? That could sustain us for a while, and then doing the accompanying research and so on. I hear what Melissa was saying in terms of things that have been registered in the collection that can't be found, and certainly we have elements of that. Our site had different modes of governance through the years, and some of our objects were not always stored on site as they are now. So things do become lost, and which is why I think where we are now, it's so valuable to make sure that our records are as tight as possible. You know, if I look at our collection records from the past that were in, say, card catalogs, they're not necessarily described to the detail that we do today. And the reason why we do that today is we know that if those people filling out the card catalogs were describing, imagining us sometime in the future, they would have added more detail. So we knew we were looking at the same object. And so I think we just get better and better. But yes, I mean, there are objects in your collection that you will discover as time continues.
Yes. Here we are. Our time is up. Unless there is anything else you ladies wish to add, we will thank all participants and mostly all our panelists that accepted the invitation. And we hope to see you in the next panel, and maybe on site next year.